immediate reopening of 4 land borders.
House of Representatives urges NCC to extend SIM registration period from 2 to 10 weeks.
National Agricultural Land Development Authority signs agreement with FED to revitalize degraded lands.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss electoral reforms in Nigeria.
All right, periodic elections are a key feature of democracy, and the rules that govern elections cannot be static because society itself is dynamic. Fresh realities and in some cases judicial interpretation of pre-existing laws necessitate electoral reforms.
Certainly. Kinsley, Good Morning Nigeria began a conversation on electoral reform sometime last month, and several issues emanating from that discussion necessitated today's edition.
Now, some of the issues raised include the challenge of conducting all elections in one day and provisions of the Nigerian Constitution with regard to the conduct of elections, as well as the need to avoid matters already settled by the highest court in the land in terms of electoral reform.
INEC explained that it seeks an amendment to Section 52 of the Electoral Act to give the Commission the window to introduce electronic voting machines or any other method of voting to avoid being saddled with obsolete equipments.
Attention was also drawn to the recommendations by the Uwais Committee, the Unamani-led committee, as well as that of Sheikh Lemu on electoral violence, with emphasis on urgent implementation of their recommendations in order to aid electoral reform in the country.
Another area such as the need to review how party primaries are conducted and the need to reduce fees for party nomination forms to open up the space for diverse voices such as women and youths who are also mentioned.
Another matter that came up in the course of that earlier conversation is the power of the returning officer, which is not subject to oversight except for the courts, which can only overturn such decisions after a considered hearing.
And on a positive note, INEC's ability to upload results from polling units during Edo and Ondo elections, which gave room for transparency and confidence in the process, was applauded.
Well, INEC staff who was with us on that occasion, one of the commissioners, that is to say, explained that its target is an electoral act that conforms with regional and international standards. Well, these were some of the issues that popped up in the previous conversation, and we will continue from there today as we take another look at electoral reform process in Nigeria. Already the matter is before the National Assembly. I thank you for being with us on the program today. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Yusuf Narabusuma, also welcoming you to the program, reaching you live on the network service of the NTA. As usual, we have our complimentary segments, including the newspaper review, business news, and others. Let's now join Musbao Dan Wahab for the morning news. Good morning, Musbao.
Yes, good morning, Yusuf and Kingsley. Let's take the news. President Muhammadu Buhari has approved the immediate reopening of 4 land borders. This follows the recommendation of a committee chaired by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, at the Federal Executive Council meeting.
First, the four land borders. The first one is the Seme border in the southwest. Second is Ilela border in the northwest. The third is Maigatari border in the northwest. And the fourth is the Nfum border in the south-south. While the remaining borders are directed to be opened on or before 31st of December 2020.
Away from that, the 2020 Appropriation Act provides that the implementation of the 2020 budget shall run from 1st January 2020 to 31st December 2020. Unfortunately, the incursion of COVID-19 dealt a severe blow to its implementation, especially the capital components. As a remedial step, the Senate has passed a bill that seeks to extend the implementation period of the capital aspect of the 2020 budget from 31st December to 31st March 2021.
Due to mainly the unforeseen prolonged lockdown occasioned by COVID-19 pandemic.
Except now, we still have procurement processes going on in a number of ministries and agencies.
Those in favor that this section be amended and stand part of the bill, say aye. Those against, say nay. The ayes have it.
SIM registration for telecom subscribers has been a recurring issue due to security concerns. This informed the latest directive by Nigeria Communications Commission (NCC) that all SIM cards in use must be tallied with national identity number of subscribers. But the House of Representatives is urging NCC to extend the registration period from 2 to 10 weeks.
Trying to enforce this policy in a period where most Nigerians are gearing up for Christmas festivities may lead to stampede in the process of rushing to get registered, which could lead to unnecessary death and injuries.
All the telecommunication providers are serving as agents of NIMSI now. It is not only in NIMSI centers that we can get our unique digital number.
Away from the National Assembly, the revolutionary impact of gas as alternative to fuel is already being felt by communities along the Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano gas pipeline corridor. People of Karugo village in Igabi local government area of Kaduna State are the latest beneficiaries of the project.
High level of work that has been done, excellent quality and also excellent speed. I can see the potential of what will happen to these cities that this pipeline is crossing.
A corridor that will create a lot of opportunities for Nigeria.
That means expanding gas supply into the ELFS line, also making gas ready, and the AKK, it will be waiting for AKK to come up.
The federal government is attracting investment for the production of cheap and clean fuel through agribusiness ventures at no cost. To this end, an agreement between Bionas Nigeria and the National Agricultural Land Development Authority is reached to make degraded lands productive. The peace-building process of the All Progressives Congress, APC, under the leadership of the Governor Mai Mala Buni Caretaker Committee is yielding desired results among party members in the South-South zone of the country. At a strategic stakeholders meeting in Abuja, members of the Progressives formerly from the zone equally agreed to strengthen and expand the party's acceptability. Highest number of infections per day, 930 new cases of COVID-19 has been reported by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 75,062 in Nigeria. These 930 new infections were recorded in 21 states and the FCT, out of which Lagos has 279, the FCT has 179, Plateau 62, Kaduna 54, Kano and Katsina 52 each, Imo and Jigawa have 42 each, Rivers 38, Kwara 30, Nasarawa 19, Yobe 15, Ogun 13, Borno 10, Oyo and Niger State confirmed 9 new cases each. Ebonyi and Bauchi recorded 6 new cases each. Edo 5, Taraba 4, while Sokoto and Cross Rivers Cross River states have 2 new cases each. Lagos maintains lead on the cases per state chart with 25,436 cases, followed by the FCT with 8,908 cases. Next is Plateau State with 4,099 cases, while Kaduna has 4,098 cases in total. Some of 7,087 cases are currently active across the country, while 66,775 recovered patients have been discharged, with 1,200 deaths on record so far. That's the news beat this morning. The program will continue with Yusuf and Kingsley after this break. Electoral reform in Nigeria is the topic. Join us after the break.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you from the studios of the Nigerian Television Authority, the NTA. We're discussing what are taking the second leg of our discussion on electoral reforms in Nigeria. But first, let's look at the economic aspect of the segment on which we talk about commerce here on Good Morning Nigeria. That's talking about federal and subnational governments enjoined to prioritize MSMEs through provision of infrastructure. Let's join Kunle Adeyeye for the details.
Data from the National Bureau of Statistics has shown that micro, small and medium enterprises contribute 50% to the country's GDP and also constitute about 80% of the workforce. As a critical component of economic development, many Nigerians crave for improved infrastructure, especially electricity, to sustain the MSMEs like what obtains in developed economies. A power sector analyst, Princeville Okore, says the ability to adequately enhance the performance of MSMEs largely rests on effective power supply.
The only way to move the economy forward is to enhance the ability of SMEs to save whatever income they earn from their efforts. Where they earn income and the income is spent on fuel, spent on paying without a transparent and accountable mechanism in billing them in power sector, will not really help them.
He adds that the informal sector deserves more attention from government. And to the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange to see the details of Wednesday's tradings, December 16, 2020. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Many thanks, Kunle Adeyeye, for the business package. Coming up next is Newspaper Review.
Oh, well, as usual, Bayo Atoyebi is in the studios here to discuss some of the major highlights of today's newspapers. Welcome, Bayo.
Thank you, Malabo. Good morning. Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, Bayo, good to see you.
Kingsley, can we get started?
Yes. Let's take a look at the window page of the Punch newspaper. You have a number of running stories, but you also have fresh copies. Above the nameplate of the Punch newspaper, NIN, that is the National Identification Number. Federal government comes under fire as 164 million phones risk disconnection. That's page 19. All abducted schoolboys alive in Zamfara forest, says Masari. We expect COVID-19 vaccine by January. That's according to the health minister. Senate holds special session, passes 2021 budget on Monday. And then you have an earpiece there, which is COVID-19 update. That's beside the nameplate, and it's showing you our national figures now. 75,062 confirmed cases. We have 66,775 discharged and 1,200 dead. And around the world, over 1.6 million have died from well over 74 million cases. Lead story of the paper comes with a kicker. Reopening of 4 borders, that's to say land borders. LCCI, that is the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and experts raise smuggling alert as federal government retains rice ban. 3 riders. Other land borders to be reopened on or before December 31st, says Minister. Government failed. Its closure didn't stop smuggling. That's the claim by Abuja Chamber of Commerce. Inconsistent government policies jeopardizing investment, says DG NACC. And you see the photographs there from Borno State. That's the governor, Babagana Zulu, meeting with internally displaced persons at the Dar es Salaam refugee camp in Bagasola. That's a border community in Chad. Details, of course, you can see there on the front page of the paper. Shiites continue free as Zakzaki protests in Kaduna. Police tortured my co-detainee to death in January. That's according to a witness before one of the harsh NSAS panels. Details on page 11. Tambuwal and Secondus in Bauchi kick off 13.6 billion naira road construction. Appeal court berates judge, orders Metu's retrial, and voids Dasuki's indictment. That's page 12. The suspected Fulani gunmen kill Benue lawyer, wife, and blind old man. It's page 9. And on page 8, immigration denies caterer passport renewal over harsh NSAS protests. Page 8. Bravo.
Well, here on Daily Trust, we have many stories that really some we might have touched on in the Punch. But at the top there, we have Nigerian federal government may block 161 million phone numbers in 2 weeks. You get details of that on page 23. And top Kaduna officials test positive for COVID-19. You can go to page 52, that is, for details. And what has changed for the rice farmers in Zabarmari? That is going to be answered on page 3. The lead story on the Daily Trust is about the borders, and it says rice, poultry importation remains banned as federal government reopens 4 borders. And the writers here are for the number, one of which is decision long overdue, says expert, and then jubilations at Semi, Megaturi, Ilela borders. And the other writer here is Lagos Chambers, and MAN, that is Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, called for effective policing, that is of the borders. And the last writer there is consider as to, say, Jibia Kongulam residents. And of course, the main picture here on the front page is linked to the border. Of course, these are pictures of 3 borders that have been opened. And these are the one at Seme in Lagos. You have the Ilela in Sokoto and Megateri in Jigawa State. Below the pictures, Katsina schoolboys cited in Zamfara, that's the governor there speaking, Masari. Ownership control tussles rage among AEDC investors. You can go to page 24. And CBN releases 12.5 billion naira to boost poultry sector on page 25. And finally, Yorima declares for 2023 presidency. You get the details of that political story on page 45. Bayo?
Thank you, Yusuf. Let's start with our running stories. First, let's go to Zamfara. The Nigerian Tribune reports that there are indications that criminal gangs known as bandits that have been terrorizing communities in the Northwest are being sought after by jihadist groups for an alliance. The paper calls the French agency AFP are saying that the kidnapping was carried out by a local gangster. His name is given as Awalu Daudawa, an armed robber and a cattle wrestler. He is said to be collaborating with Idi Miroti and Dan Karemi, 2 criminal gang chiefs with strong local following. The terrorist Boko Haram had claimed that they are associated with the kidnap, but the Army High Command has described that as mere propaganda. Governor Aminu Bello Masari says the kidnapped students of Government Science Secondary School Kankara are alive and are currently in forest in Zamfara. The forest spreads across the border between Zamfara and Katsina states. And he says these criminal gangs are the ones moving between, committing banditry between Zamfara and Katsina states. He also said that it is not true that 2 students have died. He said, I chatted and interacted with 2 students who escaped, and they did not say any abducted student died or was killed. The number of students to be accounted for, he says, is 334. He also expressed sympathy with the parents who are expressing agony for their individual children. And he added, I have responsibility for the 839 students and specifically for the 334 that are out there. And he assured that everything will be done to ensure that they are released. Meanwhile, he said discussions are going on through Miyetti Allah to ensure the safe return of all the students. The other running story deals with the determination to get everybody with a cell phone to ensure that they have names, national identity number associated with their telephone. Daily Trust have done a research on this, and they said so far there are 161 million lines could be blocked by 31st December because there's no way that deadline can be met. The Daily Trust reports that the telephone population in Nigeria is 203.5 million. And so far, in the 10 years of NIMSI, they have succeeded in registering 42 million Nigerians. Therefore, they now have 2 weeks to register 161.5 million. If they were only able to achieve 42 million in 10 years. The Daily Trust also say that experts tell you that the capacity of NIMSI is to register 2.5 million monthly. And so to achieve 161 million in 2 weeks is a Herculean task. Already, one is advised on the social media to dial *346#. And if you do, it will confirm whether or not your SIM card or your telephone number is registered. Yes, it will indicate to you it is registered, but it doesn't tell you whether you have your NIN has been apparently co-located with the telephone agency. But be that as it may, the Director General of the Nigeria NIMSI, Aliyu Aziz, said that NIMSI is working with various government agencies like Central Bank, NCC, to syndicate the digital identification. Ministry of Communication and Digital Economy has also approved 173 agents in 30 states of the Federation, particularly involving public sector institutions, to conduct the enrollment.
Sorry, that's the aspect that I find worrisome in terms of the response or explanation. What, you are outsourcing this to private agents to be collecting data of citizens?
Well, the fact is here is the Minister of Communications and Digital Economy has approved 173 agents and 30 state government public sector institutions.
I'm talking about the agents. Who are the agents? These are private individuals. They are private entities. So why would your data be in the control of private entities that will capture the data in the first instance? We also talked about personal identity security. These are the things that you just find them in different locations. As we were saying yesterday, you want to get a license, you register. You want to do PVC, you register. All kinds of BVN, you register. Now you are appointing agents. Agents.
Yes.
Agents. What will be the security of the data that the agents will collect?
Critical.
And if they collect it, what they will do with it, you have no clue.
Yes.
Why should that be so? When I read that yesterday after our program, I was just saying to myself, well, this is just another dimension that they ought to examine much more critically, before proceeding with it.
I think I agree with you.
Yeah, Bayo, the other point is, let's look at it. It's been an issue that has been said several times. I recall on Good Morning Nigeria, we've discussed this. There's a computer expert who's also linked to the security services. Has been our guest on a number of occasions and has, of course, made points that needed to be made publicly without getting into details. Look, to the extent that we have information concerning Nigerians who are either using banking or financial services, who are either voters, who have driver's licenses, who have been captured amongst the 42 or 43 million under the name by NIMSI, you can begin to use their data, coordinate their data, get their phone contacts, and see which ones you can. You don't have to bother the individuals. It is only when those things are not necessary, when those things do not give you sufficient picture, as it were, that you cannot begin to ask for an update of the information supplied by the individuals. When you want, even if your SIM is missing or you want to update your SIM, you must come with an identity, and the identity will be photocopied. They will ask for either your driver's license or an international passport. When you apply for an international passport, there are fields that are compulsory for you to fill. When you complete those fields, your data is also there. So everybody will now you spend time to go to a center, you queue up, you will go there, they say, no, we don't have a chance for you today. And then 2 weeks later, I say, no, everything is not. I don't know. Sometimes this
the issue sometimes is we tend to be expanding the whole issue of registration and everything. You have your registration, you have your voter's card, you have your driver's license, you have your ATM card, you have your name, and all these have the information, almost similar information about you. So I think a single one can do the magic for everybody else. And I think most of those having the cards should have one or two of these, facilities. So why going round and round and round all this? The questions are too many, really.
Ideally, if there is a syndication between the agencies that have personal data, it will become very unnecessary. But the concern, which Kingsley has rightly pointed out, is putting personal information of individuals in the hands of agents. That is very risky. Nobody anywhere around the world joke with personal information about individuals.
The National Population Commission has responsibility for civic registration.
Anyway,
I think these are some of the things that that should be sorted out.
Yes.
There's no point in working in silos.
Coordination.
Yes.
This is what is missing.
Now, these are questions being poured out. At least they are listening. At least they will take charge of that and they see what they can do about that. We thank you so much, Bayo, for appearing on this program this morning.
Thank you.
Tomorrow is another day.
We look forward to it.
Yeah, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live from the studios of the Nigerian Television Authority. We shall now take a break. We'll be back in a moment with more on this program. Stay with us. Good Morning Nigeria is reaching you from the Nigerian Television Authority. And we are this morning discussing electoral reform. That's the second leg of the discussion. We had it much earlier on. And as a prompter to this discussion, let's have an excerpt from our previous discussion.
The formation of political parties, we were not entitled to go beyond the prescriptions of the Constitution. And the number of other provisions there, which the Supreme Court said were a duplication of provisions of the Constitution. Again, we learned from that and tried to correct that in the 2002 Electoral Act. But the main controversy about the 2002 Electoral Act, if you remember, INEC said they couldn't conduct all elections in one day. But the sentiment, the politics of the National Assembly at that time was that all elections should be conducted in one day in order that governors, because many senators were afraid or concerned about the tendencies of their governors. Each amendment exercise takes into account the lessons learned in the just concluded election. So we've been trying to perfect the system. We also started with manual electoral voters register, if you recall. But during our time, we introduced electronic registration, not electronic voting, because again, the sentiment then was no, we cannot do electronic voting.
The Commission has made far-reaching comments on the bill for Act to amend the Electoral Act 2010. And we have also looked at some of the provisions of the Constitution that have a bearing on the electoral framework. And we have also proposed amendments to some of those provisions, so that at the end, we will have a very robust electoral act and a good constitutional framework to conduct elections, taking into consideration the fact that the society is moving and that most of the issues and most of the processes are now done electronically. One of those things we have proposed is an amendment to Section 52 of the Electoral Act to give the Commission the leeway and the window to introduce electronic voting machines or any other method of voting that the Commission wants to introduce for the time being. Is done. It will enable us to introduce various innovations and also be very, very creative because technology is dynamic.
The idea is if you empower INEC to deploy technology, be it at the point of voting or result collation and transmission, which we believe should be something that INEC can deploy at those levels. The idea is that introduction of technology would serve as a complementary role to even the manual process. The lack of that empowerment in the Electoral Act for INEC has been a major challenge. So even the smart card reader, you see, we follow previous litigations in court. Whenever questions are raised on the data from the smart card reader, the court would always put the law as in the hierarchy of laws, put the Electoral Act as to supersede the INEC's policy or guidelines on elections.
All right, now those were excerpts from our first conversation some weeks ago on electoral reform, and happily one of the guests on that occasion is also here with us in the studio, so I'll be introducing him presently. We have also here with us in the studio distinguished Senator Kabir Gaya, who is Chairman, Senate Committee on Electoral Matters. Senator, pleasure to have you with us on the program.
Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, and the gentleman I was talking about is Mr. Festus Okoye, a lawyer and the National Commissioner in charge of information and voter education at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Mr. Okoye, delighted to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Okoye is live here today.
Yeah, the last time we had him, he was in Bayelsa. Ahead of the by-election in Bayelsa. That was by Zoom, yes.
Yeah. Yes. And also joining us on Zoom are two gentlemen, one of which is the Executive Director, Yaga Africa, Samson Mitodo. Thank you for joining us, Samson.
Thank you. Good morning.
I also have Olushola Babalola, Development Expert and an election consultant at the Transition Monitoring Group, the TMG. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria, Olushola.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, gentlemen, once again, I'd like to have you. But let's begin with distinguished Senator Kabir Gaya, who is a ranking senator and also chairman of the Senate Committee on Electoral Matters and former governor of Kano State. We know that the process of reforming the Electoral Act, either amending or passing a new act, is ongoing. But tell us, what is the sentiment in the National Assembly, particularly in the Senate, with regard to the need to have a new Electoral Act before the next cycle of general elections in 2023?
Well, and much earlier before that, Kingsley, let's just set the tone, really.
Yeah.
At what stage are we?
Well, first of all, we have gone very far on the process of the electoral amendment. We started with a retreat in Lagos some months back, and we invited stakeholders, INEC, PLAC, and all other stakeholders, including the Office of Attorney General. We had a retreat for 3 days in Lagos, whereby we are able to come up with the proposal from the National Assembly amendment on the Electoral Act, then the proposal by INEC based on its experience during the election, and then the proposal from other stakeholders who are also been watching the elections in Nigeria and have interest in making amendment in some few areas where it deserves amendment. So we had that 3-day retreat, and we came up with a working document. The amendment from both sectors were put together, and we took that as a working document for the Electoral Reform Act. And with that, we came back to Abuja, had meetings again, invited all the stakeholders again, had meetings, and review also those aspects again. And thirdly, too, we also then arranged for a public hearing, which was done recently. It was live for about 5 hours. We thank NTA for giving us all that support, because with it was a live program from 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m., and that was an excellent. Nigerians were very happy with that. We received memorandum from various stakeholders. We even receive contribution from Nigerians through internet. They send us through the website of our committee. We receive all those things. And now we are packaging that. We also had a meeting after that. We invited the chairman of INEC and the commissioners. And now we form a technical committee that's going to also work on the document we gave them. And by the time we come back from our break, I think we'll be able to start thinking of presenting this document to the both chambers of the National Assembly. We are working as a team with both the House Rep and then the Senate are all working on the same document and meeting at the same time so that we don't waste time. Because if we are doing it independently, it means the Senate, they will do its own, the House will do its own separately. After that, we now call for a conference committee to look at the differences in those areas. But now that we're working together, we're hoping that by God's grace, by the first quarter of next year, we'll be able to get the Electoral Act passed and then submitted to President for signing. All the leadership, the Senate, the Senate President, and the House of Rep Speaker all agreed that we must, at all costs, finish this process by the first quarter of next year.
Okay, now the sentiment.
Sorry, let's clarify this. I asked about the sentiment in the National Assembly, part of which you have touched on. You have said, look, you're working towards the first quarter of next year.
Yes.
PIB, first quarter of next year. And a number of other pieces of legislation, also first quarter of next year. But in spite of the retreat and the gamut of interactions that you've had, we still continue to hear voices insisting on certain aspects of the reform which they would like to have. But we also understand that, well, you are doing your committee work right now, but that the sentiments may not be on all fours with what the committee is doing. It's not prejudicial, but that's why I was asking about the sentiment.
That's generally the trend. Anytime a committee brings its report, it may not be 100% in agreement with all the senators in the chambers or the House of Rep members, but we will discuss. And then the Senate President will put it to vote. Those who agree with so portion of the Constitution, of the Electoral Act, say yeah, and those who not agree say nay. And once they hear more, it means it has been passed. So all I'm saying is no decision is 100% perfect. But whatever decision taken, if the merits are more than the demerits, it means that that decision will be passed. So with all the sentiments in the National Assembly, people have their own views, and that's why it is a parliament. You bring up your view, it is accepted, then you carry the day. So certainly we don't expect 100% of all the senators to agree, but majority of the members of the National Assembly will agree on this, on the proposal, and then we'll bring it out for assent to the president. Even when we submit to the presidency, they also have to review it themselves, because that's why we involve the office of the Attorney General into the discussion, so that by the time we submit to the president, if he needs any views from the Attorney General's office, then at least they say they are part of the discussions, and they will not send us back with the document to the National Assembly.
Well, the other leg of all of this also has to do, we're going to spend this last time with you before we bring in Festus Okoye, the amendment to the Constitution. Yeah. There are certain provisions in the Constitution that relate obviously to the conduct of elections. Yeah. And again, when you relate it to the issue of sentiments, it would appear that this is not in lockstep with the process of amending the Electoral Act. What's your reaction to this? Because you have different committees working on that.
Areas where we have conflict, or where the Constitution says something on the Electoral Act, you find that the Constitution is more superior than the Electoral Act. So we are also looking at areas where we are going to amend the Constitution. Definitely we have raised a bill to amend some areas that affect the Electoral Act. For example, the issue of registration of political parties, that once you have an office in Abuja, even it is in Nyanyan, you take a small office of 3,000 naira per annum, you are deemed to be registered once you have the executive of the political party. But that's not a party. A party should have representation at least on 2/3 of this country. So we're making amendments on that condition, because we need to have political parties that are really relevant. You don't have to have parties that they don't even have a councillor, and they are running for presidential election. So we are trying to also amend that provision in the Constitution in such a way that it will go along with what we have in the Electoral Act, so that the Electoral Act can be fully protected in that line. Sadly, you have seen the ballot paper during the last election. It's as large as over 1 meter plus. So, and even though we have 92 political parties, the writings on the ballot sheet is so small that you cannot even identify, even with glasses in some areas. So therefore, that is better to have about few number of parties. And I'm happy to say that the first time we had a meeting with the electoral commissioners and then the chairman of the Electoral Commission, we told them that they need to deregister political parties. They were just too many. And I'm happy to say that they did that. We now have 18 political parties out of 92. But if we go also by the criteria, we hope to trim down to about 5 or 6 political parties. And I think that would be good for the nation. The cost of even the production of the ballot paper and other documents would be reduced. So therefore, there will be reduction in using taxpayers' money on printing of those documents. So I believe that the more we work on the Constitution, the better we have a free, fair, and credible election.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Kabirga. Let's turn to Okoye and then hear your views about what the senator said and the journey so far. INEC has been at the center of this, and of course, it's your own article, it's your own instrument that is being worked on, which means especially you, who have been part of this discussion for quite some time, has been very busy on it. How far, so far, given the explanation he has given, how huge has the assignment been, and how far have you gone in trying to go along with the National Assembly in this regard?
Let me say that this time around, the approach that the National Assembly has adopted in relation to amending the Electoral Act is the best approach and a more strategic approach. This is because right from the onset, all the key stakeholders are involved in the processes leading to this particular amendment. I recall that between the 5th and 7th of March this year, there was a retreat in Lagos. Both the Senate Committee on INEC was represented, the House Committee on Electoral Matters was there. Almost all our national commissioners and the resident electoral commissioners and collation and returning officers who superintended the 2019 elections were there. The Office of the Attorney General was represented, and some other key stakeholders were represented at that particular retreat. Now, a document was presented to that particular summit, and it was debated. The Commission made its own comments relating to the amendments proposed, and also submitted additional amendments. Thereafter, we came back and also reviewed what we have done and made further submissions to the National Assembly. And we also participated at the public hearing. I remember at the public hearing, I accompanied the acting chairman of the commission then to the public hearing. And then thereafter, the substantive chairman of the commission was also involved in a technical committee. So I believe that this time around, areas of conflict have been drastically reduced, and there seems to be some level of consensus in relation to the fundamentals of the amendments that are needed. Of course, there are some other areas that there has been some form of a disagreement on details. But in terms of the substance, in terms of the way to go, I think that there has been some level of agreement. Now, I think that some basic principles underline this particular amendment. 1, to increase the credibility of our elections. 2, to reduce the cost of conducting elections in this country. 3, to ensure some level of inclusivity in the electoral process. 4, to sanction electoral violators. 5, to make sure that whatever amendments we are making now takes into consideration the dynamics of the society and the movement of the society, and the fact that we need to deepen the use of technology in the electoral process. So these are some of the principles and underlying sentiments that underlie this amendment. Now, I also want to say that there are also some aspects of the Constitution that have a huge bearing on the electoral process, and we're also following on some of those ones because some of those key provisions, some of those fundamental provisions in the Constitution, unless you retouch them, some of the amendments you are making to the Electoral Act will not go a long way But we are hoping and praying that these two will go hand in hand so that at the end of the day, we will have a robust electoral framework that will give us a very, very good election. But I believe that the National Assembly realizes the fact that the society is dynamic and the society is moving, and we need to introduce and deepen the use of technology in the electoral process. And we are happy that almost all the key sectors and all the key stakeholders agree on this particular aspect of the amendments.
I don't know how comfortable you would be when I say you could go ahead and tell us the details, or rather expatiate further on the areas of disagreement you said, especially on the details, but the substance have been there.
Well, one of the areas of disagreement relates to the punitive sanctions that were proposed in the bill for those who violate the provisions of the Electoral Act. For instance, one of the provisions says that if an official of the commission or a staff of the commission attends a political party convention or primaries and returns a false report, that particular official will be prosecuted, and that if found guilty, the person will go to jail without an option of fine. And we believe that it's slightly draconian and will deter people from even offering their services, especially when they make genuine mistakes. So we are saying, yes, sanction people who violate the law, but don't make it in such a way that people will run away from serving the nation. So those are some of the small disagreements relating to the Act.
You're saying small disagreements.
That's not small.
Small. Absolutely. There are bigger disagreements, presumably, but we'll return to that. Let's join Samson Itodo, whom we earlier introduced. He's joining us via Zoom. He's in Oxford, England, where he's undergoing a program. The Executive Director of Yaga Africa. The last time we had this conversation, one of the officials of Yaga Africa was also here with us in the Abuja studio. Sam, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Good morning once again.
All right. Well, of course, you've listened to the two earlier discussants on their views with regard to aspects of the ongoing process to reform the Electoral Act. Against the background of what has happened, are you satisfied with the way we are proceeding this time to amend the Electoral Act? And if so, what is your source of satisfaction?
Yeah, thanks. To a large extent, I'm very satisfied with the progress we're making. And I'd say this for three reasons. First, it's the content of the reforms itself. It's impressive to note that the National Assembly has adopted, the repeal and enact Electoral Act. And because this is 2020, this will be the 10 years of the operationalization of the current Act. Even the Act has been amended about three times in December of 2010, because the 2010 Act was passed into law in August of 2010, then amended in December, amended in January, and then amended in 2015, just a few days to the 2015 elections. And so there was need to harmonize all this legislation into one piece of legislation and incorporate new amendments. But the exhaustive, proposals made by the National Assembly and other critical stakeholders, it's significantly different, from the previous attempt to amend the Electoral Act. So my satisfaction devolves from that approach that was adopted. The second is the process adopted by the National Assembly, and I commend the chairman of the Senate committee for the leadership he is providing in collaboration with the House, and the fact that these two chambers are in harmony, and they've been consultative in all their engagement, engaging with INEC, engaging with the Office of the Attorney General. It shows that we have learned from the mistakes of the past, which is, the National Assembly engaging on its own voyage of amendments without incorporating the different stakeholders. And I think it's a fantastic approach adopted by the National Assembly. The third part stems from the fact that we are racing against time, and it appears that the National Assembly understands the fierce urgency to get this amendment passed early enough. We're about 750 days or so to the 2023 elections. The National Assembly has indicated, and the chairman just said, by the first quarter of next year. Our expectation is it won't exceed March of 2021, that once it is passed, the president will, assent to the legislation, given the background of the engagement with the Office of the Attorney General. And so the executive is fully involved in this process. And so those are the three sort of reasons why I'm very satisfied. There are several gaps within the current legislation, but a proposal, but I think that we're actually set on a good course, provided we end or conclude this process by the first quarter of next year, because the preparations for 2023, started in 2019. So the Electoral Commission and critical stakeholders, need some level of certainty on the electoral law, the legal framework, so we can test run, some amendments or new innovations introduced in the Anambra elections, in the Ekiti and Osun elections before the 2023 elections.
Well, still with you, Sam, while we are having this Zoom connection to you at Oxford, let's now begin to drill down into specifics. There are matters, of course, that reside in the Constitution. There are matters in the Electoral Act itself, and there are matters that are carried forward from time to time in the electoral guidelines issued by INEC itself for the conduct of general elections. What, in your view, are some of these critical provisions that you would consider a must in the new Electoral Act?
The first one, you see, there are fundamental principles that underpin any electoral system. The first is the independence of the Electoral Commission. And any amendment that does not protect the Electoral Commission and does not ensure its independence, to a large extent, it's just an effort in futility. And I say this based on Section 3 of the Act. One of the proposals, and I again reiterate that both INEC and the National Assembly should be commended, is securing the financial or strengthening the financial independence of INEC. If you look at the 2019 elections, based on the reports on that election, the budget for the 2019 elections was 189 billion naira. Now, 143 billion was released to INEC in November of 2018. That's 90 days or 3 months to the 2019 elections. That's unacceptable. There's no way to undermine the Electoral Commission. There's no way to undermine election if you starve the Electoral Commission of the resources that it requires. Because elections are a capital-intensive enterprise, and they involve a lot of procurement. So how do you expect the Electoral Commission to procure ballot papers, to procure or produce result sheets, or even recruit the manpower that it requires? And so this, and then about 45 billion was released later on in December 2018. That's unacceptable. And so this amendments to Section 3 of the Act that safeguards INEC's financial independence or strengthens, I think it's a laudable proposal. And the proposal is to ensure that the funding for finances for INEC released about 180 days to election. For us at YIGA Africa, we believe even 1 year to the elections, the Electoral Commission should secure its funding. The second amendment is the proposal to Section 68. Now, these are what I call, priority proposals. Why is Section 68 very important? Section 68 of the current Act, provides that only results declared by a returning officer in an election is final, and it's only subject to review by a tribunal or a court. And that has emboldened politicians to force and compel INEC officials to declare results at gunpoint. Senator Gaya will know, and even Festus, the National Commissioner, knows that we've got people in the National Assembly today who forced INEC officials to declare results at gunpoint. Their elections were upheld in court. And that is problematic because the politicians exploit Section 68 to circumvent elections. And so the current proposal that subject that review, subject elections declared or results declared under controversial circumstances under duress to review by the commission, I think it's a progressive legislation that should be supported. The third proposal in this bill is on electronic voting. Even though the Electoral Amendment Act 2015 provides under Section 52 that INEC can determine the procedure, for elections. I think this act, this current proposal, recognizes and makes provisions for electronic voting. Although there are some gaps in the proposal. So we need expansive amendments to Section 49 and other sections, that integrate electronic voting, because there are consequential amendments that require to be made. But I see that from the proposal from INEC, they've also made expansive proposals on certain sections of the Act that provides for electronic voting. I think the other issue in the amendment is the limitation for campaign financing. In fact, there are two proposals on the cost of running for elections. One is on, I think, Section 87 that deals with, limiting the cost of nomination fees and charges that parties impose on aspirants, and also restricting, the criteria that parties impose on candidates to provisions of the Constitution. And I think this will strengthen internal party democracy. It would also encourage, the participation of women and persons with disability in elections. There are also, limitations to campaign expenditure. So I think there are progressive amendments that are made in the current proposal that requires the support of Nigerians. And I'm confident that if this law is passed in a timely fashion, it will strengthen our democratic institutions like political parties, like INEC, like civil society and other groups who are involved in election. But you can pass any law. If our political class does not change their attitude towards politics and towards running for office, they will reinvent new ways of circumventing our elections. So as we make these laws, we must also continually speak to the conscience of our political class and also strengthen citizens to hold them to account.
Many thanks, Sami Doto there, Executive Director, Yaga Africa, speaking to us from Oxford in UK. Let's hear your views. Olushola Babalola, who is also a development expert and, of course, election consultant and really a monitor of the elections, being at the Transition Monitoring Group. You've heard, issues raised or rather discussed by Sami Doto talking about the details of the Electoral Act as he sees it. What do you make out of his assumption about the areas he mentioned, talking about especially Section 68 that talks about declaration of results, and of course amendment of Section 3 that safeguards INEC, independence financially, and of course limitations to campaign financing. What would you say about this? How far have your organization gone in trying to accept or reject or go along line with this one?
Yeah, that's a very good development. Firstly, let me commend INEC for the good job they are doing, at their side, and as well as the Committee on the Electoral Reform. That's the Senate Committee on the Electoral Reform. This time around, you can see seriousness on their side. Just like Samson said, the journey started, sometimes last year. And this time around, you can see that they are working around the clock to make sure that the bills are expeditiously, passed. So this time around. So I want to categorically say that technology is one of the things that we need to embrace if we really need to make our elections, credible in Nigeria. So for that reason, in terms of declaration of, election results, just like you said, so we need to go with technology. And INEC has, done quite a number of initiative and effort, to that extent by deploying, some of the technology. Like take, for example, the issue of ZPAD, which is a very good development to our electoral, system. So which allows, for the transmission of results, from the polling unit to the INEC portal, for everybody to see it. They have done that, in Edo, they have done that in Ondo, and I'm sure it's something that will come to stay in Nigeria. So we need to see how we can actually strengthen this process and make sure that we have, this as part of, the reform, that Nigerians are actually, yearning for.
All right, Olusola Babalola, thank you very much. We'll come back to you shortly. Let's come back to our studios here. Senator Kabir Gaya, you've listened, of course, now to some of the critical issues being raised by Festus Okoye, Sami Todo, and Olusola. There's another one I would like to also put on the table because of the interconnectedness. They've talked about fundamental principles underpinning the amendment of the Electoral Act, but as you very well know, there is no word in a piece of legislation that is useless when you are making interpretation. One cardinal issue that we have seen in recent years, particularly in the Fourth Republic, has to do with litigation, election litigation. And a number of the matters pertaining to election litigation relate to pre-election matters. And those pre-election matters also derive from party primaries. Sami Todo was talking about an aspect of campaign finance, how much you take for how much expression of interest and so on and so forth, inclusivity. But we do know, and I'm sure you've seen that, you've also had the experience of political parties generally almost just being inept at conducting their primaries. And the consequent litigation has created sometimes a great deal of uncertainty even after a person has been returned elected into office, whether a governor, whether a senator, or some other legislator. Is it an aspect that is of concern to you and to your colleagues in the process of this amendment?
Well, most of us has gone through this kind of party interference or party maneuvering on how the candidate would be. And that's why the Amending the Electoral Act on that issue has been specific, how the role the party could play in producing a candidate. And even the court cases that are going up to Supreme Court, who I know of a friend who up to date is having a court case, a Supreme Court case, based on not only party primaries, based on the litigation before the election. So I believe it's of much concern to us, and we're looking at those areas where some role of punishment will be put into that effect to make sure that the parties don't continue to do that, because parties sometimes they can produce a list of others. And you could see how the issues, the problems we had even during the few last elections we had in Damfara State, where the party lost the whole candidates for the elections. So we are looking at all those areas in such a way that we will not have those kind of occurrence. And when some talk about the issue of financing INEC, yeah, we have said that the INEC must be independent, and government should be able to finance the elections a year even before the election. Because when last election, I remember the INEC didn't get their funding until almost the last minute of the election, and therefore they gave contract out without the back cashing of the money for the project, and the contractor took the job, and they did in a hurry to produce those projects, and that's I think why the problem of shifting the election for another 1 week, and that caused both the party and the Nigerians a lot of problems. So therefore, we are saying that the election for 2023, Nigerian government should start funding the INEC between on this 2021 year, so that they can go. Especially now, we are thinking of going for electronic voting. So when you are having electronic machines, these are machines that will be produced based on the requirement of the National Electoral Commission. So therefore, for those machines to be produced, this process should start next year. And therefore, the government should start funding INEC. Maybe 50% of the cost for the election should be funded by next year, so that they could use those funding to now order for those electronic voting machines, and that will save the process. And the other issue which he discussed on the issue of making sure that the staffs of like what he said, the staffs are scared of the punishment we put in the Electoral Act for that. If you present a wrong result or fake result of primaries to the INEC, and then the staff of the INEC did that, he may end up losing his job and go to jail. I think if somebody is committed to serve the nation, you don't have that fear. Whatever punishment we put is good enough to deter people from doing the wrong thing. You know, when we had our first meeting with INEC, I said the revenue or the incentive for INEC staff should be increased. Their allowances should be increased. Their salary should be different, should be increased in such a way that they should not be tempted by politicians to do something wrong because they are given some money. So that's why I'm also looking at the welfare of the INEC staffs should be improved. I said that to the commission, that they have to find ways in generating and getting funds to make their staffs more comfortable and to do their job perfectly, and then to the job in the interest of Nigeria. So a lot of these areas we are looking at making amendments, make the INEC staffs comfortable, do their job well, and then also to make Nigerians have confidence that we are going to do credible and election, so that people could be happy with what the INEC will do, so that people could have confidence in the electoral process. And that's what all we are doing. Our leadership in the National Assembly, the Senate President, Dr. Ahmed Lawan, is also committed to that process. Virtually, he calls me, Gaya, what are we? What process are you now? These are the guidelines. You have to do this. You have to do this. And we agree with him, and we are working on that process. So I believe that Nigerians will have a robust Electoral Act. And we are not only making amendment, we are repealing and enacting the law. So it will be now a new law, 2021 Electoral Act, which could be used in courts and saying amended this or amended that. We are going to compile everything, and we are working in that direction.
Distinguished Senator, yes. I would want to really hang a little bit for a while on this issue of the measures being taken, especially the disagreement he mentioned, talking about going to court, which you laughed over here, talking about it being draconian. Yeah. It seems like from your analysis, you're trying to defend that to an extent that you're trying to maybe add up some palliatives or some welfare things to the INEC staff in order to make them get off that kind of thinking and do the right thing. But it so seems as if I would want you that word to get draconian, because there's no option of fine there. Can't you? Don't you see considering that?
Well, they are doing that to deter them from doing those mistakes. For example, if there is a primaries and the INEC star went and declared something else on his own, contrary to what is done on at the Benue, it means it's actually drilling the system. And for anybody drilling the system, should be punished. And that's why we are putting that law. And then we're also introducing the Electoral Offences Commission, so that there will be a commission that will be handling with all this violence during elections and electoral offences. That will also help, because INEC is now doing all the litigations, and they have so many cases in court during after elections. And I believe up to now, every election, the people go to court, and the INEC is also being involved. So that the government spends so much money on this litigation. So if we have a commission that will be handling this all electoral offences and other things, it now lets the job for INEC to do is or concentrate on the election, while the litigation is being taken care by the commission. So we are all doing those efforts. Even that bill is coming up too. We intend to pass that bill as soon as possible, so that it will help also in the process. It will help also an INEC job doing its job properly. So I believe whatever law we put, it is in the interest of Nigerians and for the betterment of Nigeria. Just like we are to digress a little, we are talking about the issue of kidnapping. The punishment is not capital, but we're also trying to introduce capital punishment for kidnapping, because if people are being kidnapped, some of them are being killed. So those kidnappers will be punished by the capital punishment. And that will deter some of them from behaving like that. So if you put a kind of, it's less like a carrot and stick. You are giving them good pay, and you are punishing them for not doing a good job. So I believe it is in order, and the National Assembly have support in that process.
Thanks, Senator. Festus Okoye, one of the issues, again, which I think we touched on this, excuse me, the first time we had this conversation with respect to the provisions of the current Electoral Act 68, namely review of the return by a returning officer, or declaration by a returning officer. Sami Dodo, of course, has already elaborated and said that, look, rather than the review being done by the courts, it should be done by the appointer of the returning officer, namely the election management body. How does INEC view this? Will therefore the power to declare they reside in INEC as INEC, or it will be one that resides in an agent whom we have sent out, appointing him in the first instance on the basis of clear-cut criteria and assurance that he will deliver on his mandate?
Well, before I just get to that, if you permit me, let me just respond to a few of the issues raised by distinguished Senator Gaya, especially in relation to the fourth alteration to the Constitution on the issue of pre-election matters. One of the challenges we have, and one of the issues we are going back to the National Assembly for alteration, relates to Section 285 of the Constitution relating to pre-election matters. Now, you recall that during the fourth alteration, timelines were imputed into the Constitution relating to the period for the determination of pre-election matters. The Court of First Instance has 180 days to make that determination. The course of action must arise at least within a period of 14 days for you to go to court. And then the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court have 60 days apiece. It's very clear to us, even from the last by-elections we had, that particular provision is no longer adequate for our purposes, even from the 2019 elections. Because if you look at the case from Bayelsa, look at the case from Zamfara and so on, you will see that results had already been declared before those pre-election matters were concluded. And it's creating a lot of challenges for us. So one of the things we want to see is a situation where all pre-election matters are determined before we go into the actual election. And secondly, we also believe that the 180 days given to the Court of First Instance to determine pre-election matters is too much, and that it should be reduced to 60 days. We're also looking at a situation where these pre-election matters should terminate at the Court of Appeal. State Assembly litigations relating to post-election issues and National Assembly litigations relating to post-election issues terminate at the Court of Appeal. So we don't see why pre-election matters should not terminate at the Court of Appeal, so that there will be a cut-off period within which the Commission can prepare and proceed with election. Because now it's creating a lot of challenges for us. For instance, you recall what happened in Imo North Senatorial District during this particular election. We've conducted an election, but the determination of pre-election matters has held down the collation stroke returning officer from making a return. So we believe that it is one of the issues that the National Assembly must return to. More specifically on the issue of Section 68,
just before you,
yes,
I know that one is still pending.
Yes.
Since you already went back to the pre-election matters.
Yes.
If you're talking about pre-election matters being concluded,
yes,
before the conduct of elections,
yes,
of course, you've already cut off by the proposal the Supreme Court. Let all matters, whether presidential, governorship, National Assembly, terminate pre-election, terminate at the Court of Appeal. Have you worked out the timelines to see how that works? So that would be like 120 days plus 14 days. You add that. It's some clumsy arithmetic for me to sort out. Would that necessitate, for instance, the amendment to the appropriate sections of the Constitution that will require you to conduct elections no later than a number of days for the expiration of that particular office? Or you think it syncs with it?
That section 178, especially relating to governorship election, still sits with it. But what we are looking at is, if you look at section 31 and the equivalent sections of the Electoral Act relating to the nominations and so on and so forth, we also want to move those ones backwards so that, for instance, you can require all political parties to finish their party primaries maybe 6 months before an election, or even 1 year before an election. And that will also give the courts the leeway and the window to also make all those determinations within a specific period, so that when we begin to prepare, we prepare knowing who the candidates are and who the political parties are. You see, you don't purchase ballot papers and result sheets off the shelf. You procure these things. You engage in procurement. Now, when, and I give you an example. For instance, in the Imo North Senatorial District election, the two judgments of the Court of, one from the Court of Appeal and one from the Federal High Court Abuja here, came on the 4th, on the eve of the election, when the election was on the 5th. Now, if something happened and the court said, don't proceed, the implication is that we have to go and reprint ballot papers, and then staff that had already been mobilized and paid the allowances, we have to also remobilize them and pay them the allowances and so on and so forth. So we believe that we need to carefully examine the timelines for nominations, timelines for party primaries, and also timelines for determination of pre-election matters, and align all of them in such a way that it will give us a very good framework to conduct an election, so that there will be certainty. Let the voters go to the polling units on election day, knowing who the candidates are and who the political parties are. A situation where, because of the provisions of the law, two candidates, two aspirants who are in dispute are campaigning simultaneously, because the law says that for somebody to be declared as having been elected, the person must participate in all the stages of the electoral process. So both the candidate whose name was submitted is campaigning. The candidate who is in court is also campaigning. So he creates his own dynamics and his own logistics and his own problems. And we saw this problem in almost all the places, in some of the places where we had the by-elections.
Oh, well, very much said there, Okoye. I think the distinguished senator would want to really react to this, because it's a reform. We're trying to make the system better, and these are concerns raised by INEC. And of course, it's having, you know, a heavy toll on the electoral process. How would you react to that, given the fact that the reform is there, you're working on it? Do you seem like accommodating this very concern?
Yeah, honestly, this issue is disturbing all of us. We are the candidates running for elections, and it affects us. Like he said in Imo, two candidates were, two aspirants were running for, were campaigning all over for them to be voted. And you can only vote, you can't vote two people, you can only vote one and a party. So that also helped the party to have people be mobilized, some who are supporting candidate A, or aspirant A and the other aspirant B. All of them came in to vote, and that's why they had the majority of the votes. And definitely we have to resolve that matter, and action is taken on that respect. And before we finalize the Electoral Act, we are having discussion with the INEC based on the experience. So we'll come up with a way forward so that we don't have two aspirants campaigning in under one political party, because it won't help us at all. And so in view of that, the act we are amending the act on that aspect. And the issue of I've discussed earlier, funding of the INEC must be given a high priority, and the government should be able to start funding them by next year in order to prepare for 2023 election. All this amendment on the Electoral Act is to make sure that we give Nigerians the confidence that yes, we are giving them the opportunity to a level playground for a candidates that they want to vote peacefully and then we'll have a credible election. That's all what Nigerians want. Once the election is credible, you find that even these litigations will be reduced. So with this introduction, those acts, you find that a lot of issue of litigation will certainly reduce, because all the areas where we expect to go to court have been taken care of, or being the law is taking care of that aspect before even going to the courts. So I believe that the process will be very helpful to Nigerians, and we appreciate also your contribution by enlightening the Nigerians.
All right, Senator Ogaya, thank you very much, and indeed the other guests. We're going to have to go on a short break now, and when we return, we'll continue with the conversation. All right, you're welcome back. It's still Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. Let's return to Sam Itodo, who is still with us via Zoom from Oxford. Sam, well, we've been talking about pre-election matters, and INEC has indicated what it would like to see. Senator Ogaya has also responded. Maybe you may wish to pitch in here on pre-election litigation and how we can obviate the consequences it always has on the final outcome. I say final because you can be on your seat as governor, and ultimately a decision is given that knocks you off. You can be in the chamber and then you get knocked off. That's one. Two, which is allied to this, there's something that is a bit worrisome. In law, it's referred to as forum shopping. I know that the Federal High Court is one single court, and therefore it has a number of divisions. But why would, for instance, a matter that pertains to candidates or political parties in Adamawa be heard by the Federal High Court in Abuja? Why would a matter that pertains to candidates or parties in Igbo be entertained by the Federal High Court in Abuja? Why don't you go to the forum closest to you of that particular division? And you can see sometimes the kind of conflicting decisions or rulings that have been given by these courts. What are your thoughts?
First, this point about duality of jurisdiction, it's something that needs to be addressed. And I know that this is a discussion that is ongoing with the constitution review process, because this requires constitutional amendments. And I'm aware that there's a proposal to set up a pre-elections tribunal, and then also limits certain jurisdiction of some pre-election cases or election petitions to certain courts. But before I go into details with respect to electoral adjudication, I think all of this are just an indication of the fact that we've got a desperate political class. And I say that any reform that does not result to reforms in the mindset of politicians will amount to naught, because they will always exploit, legislations or the gaps that exist within a particular system. Because all our political class seem to be interested in doing is how do they exploit this, because they want to procure power at all costs. And that's something we must address, that why will people go to this extent, just because they want to perpetuate themselves in office? So that's something we must address, that our political class need to see public service as service to the people, an opportunity to serve the common good, and not, for personal or self-aggrandizement. And that's why you've got this do or die nature of our politics. And I'm hoping that as we talk about these reforms, we look at how do we ensure that maybe we need to review our electoral system, that this first past the post, this winner takes all system that we operate, it's incompatible with our current reality. Now, maybe we should explore proportional representation for legislative elections, or there has to be a conversation about reviewing this winner-takes-all electoral system that we practice. Kenya is currently reviewing its own system. Now, yes, even though you contest an election and you lost, but there are certain ways that you can also contribute to society. So this is a conversation we must have. I agree with Festus wholeheartedly, and even Senator Ogaya, that you see, laws are dynamic in nature. If you've amended a law and it appears there are certain gaps, because there are gaps in Section 285 of the Constitution, and based on the experience that we have with respect to determination of pre-election cases. And I think that it is important that the National Assembly considers this as a priority, that all matters, all pre-election matters are resolved before elections. And in conferring jurisdiction on courts, I think we need to address this question of duality of jurisdiction. Maybe for election cases, we should adopt a different approach as proposed by you. That if you've got, you might look at geographical jurisdiction, and so if a matter comes up in a particular, or there's a particular case within a jurisdiction, limit yourself to the courts in this jurisdiction. Because what you see even in Anambra, where a court in Buhari issued, a judgment on a case in the Anambra elections. Yes, we understand that the judiciary is one because we are a federal nation. But I think that given our current reality, we need to review this question of the duality of jurisdiction that courts do share, because it would limit, these contradictory judgments that we get from our courts. But you can address duality of jurisdiction. You can impose timelines. If your judiciary is not independent, if it is not insulated from interference by the political class, if the judiciary does not purge itself, of all forms of corruption, then justice cannot be served. Because in the present day Nigerian judiciary, the fundamental question we need to ask ourselves is whether the Nigerian judiciary can deliver electoral justice. If you look at the judgments that come from our courts over the last couple of months, you question the state of our electoral jurisprudence. And to be honest, I don't even know where we are with respect to our electoral jurisprudence, where judges yield themselves to politicians for compromise, where judges issue judgments or injunctions, without recourse to law, without recourse to fact, is a huge threat to our democracy. So yes, we can, address the issue of timelines, but we also need to talk about the judiciary itself, and its independence is central, very central to this discussion on electoral reforms.
I just not Abu. I know you are itching to say something.
Yeah.
I just on this last point you made about the rigor in our current electoral jurisprudence. I'm wondering, I'm not aware, but if it is taking place, that's fine, but perhaps it should also be escalated. How much capacity enhancement takes place amongst our judicial officers with regard to elections? I know that the National Judicial Institute hosts from time to time, but it does appear that it is when elections are approaching that those who will constitute the tribunals are picked and nominated and then composed into tribunals, and then the matters go up. But as we do know, election jurisprudence is a very serious aspect in adjudication. Do we have capacity building in this respect?
So there are a few ad hoc capacity interventions that exist. I know before the 2019 elections, the NJI, did conduct trainings for the tribunal judges who were appointed by the CJN before the elections. I think that this ad hoc approach needs to be addressed. I know INEC has also, been proactive in reaching out to the judiciary, but our judges need to understand how our elections work. And I say that the judgment in Abia, in Akwa Ibom, and Rivers on the smart card reader, I think if their lordships understood the functionality of the smart card reader, maybe they would have issued a different judgment. And so judges need to update themselves on reforms introduced by INEC and reforms to the electoral legal framework. So I think that multi-stakeholder engagement and approach, it's necessary. So as the National Assembly is also considering, this bill, as soon as this bill is passed, I think our judges need to be trained. They need to be fully aware, of these legislations, and also understand INEC guidelines and regulations and see how it works. So when you talk about substantial compliance, either with the electoral law or with guidelines, you need to understand what it means. So we need a structured approach. I think this ad hoc approach that we adopt, it's no longer, it's not sustainable because you see how we trade justice for technicalities in our court, even when it is apparent based on the facts that are before their lordships, that there has been substantial compliance with the guidelines issued by INEC as well as the Electoral Act, but they still go ahead and issue judgments based on what they call technicalities. And technicalities sometimes cannot serve justice. And that is why, and I also want to urge the distinguished senator and the National Assembly to really look at, I think it's section 135 or 138 of the Electoral Act that deals with the legality of INEC's guidelines. One of the, and I consider this very problematic, quite frankly, in the current amendments, is with respect to the grounds for challenging an election. Whether it is substantial, and the proposal says, the current proposal is if the court or a tribunal determines that or considers that the election is in substantial compliance with the Electoral Act. Now, the 8th Assembly tried to confer, legality on INEC's guidelines and regulations, and I think that we need to give that the guidelines issued by INEC, because it's pursuant to its constitutional responsibility, some level of legality. Because distinguished, it's not every time that the National Assembly would have to engage in amending, the Electoral Act. That is why INEC is empowered to issue regulations and guidelines. And so we need to confer some legality, we need to confer legality on the regulations issued by INEC in furtherance of its constitutional responsibility. But the law is clear, provided it is not in conflict with the provisions of the Electoral Act and the Constitution. And this is something that I think that if introduced in the Act, it would help not just confer safeguard the independence of INEC, but it will also help our electoral process.
Thank you so much, Sam Idoto. They have very good, bright insights you've made about especially the judiciary's role in the electoral process. Distinguished Senator, we are running short of time. Let's see, or let's get the views, or let's see the picture from you now. All-inclusiveness, as Okoye said, of the electoral process, talking about people with disabilities, talking about diaspora voting, talking about women, talking about the youth. How all-inclusive is the Reform Act, or the bill which is before you now, which you're working on? Because Nigerians really want to know. We had election recently in Ghana, and then it was more or less like a different setup from Nigeria, and it's more than 80% inclusive there. And I think Nigeria needs to really work upon that. I don't know how far you've gone in trying to get that done.
Well, we in the Electoral Act, there's all provisions for how we can involve a lot of people or other stakeholders. I'm talking about the disabled, the youth and others, and even the women, how they could be involved. The other issue, the issue of the diaspora voting, that one is still part of the Constitution. The Constitution is clear on that, but we are trying to see how we can also amend the Constitution to give the possibility of diaspora voting process into the elections. And if that is done, then certainly we can go into that. Even the diaspora voting, we have so many Nigerians outside Nigeria who they could be able to vote. Even our neighbors in Niger, we have so many Nigerians in Niger. You don't talk of people in US or in UK or other places, but even our neighbors, Niger, Benin Republic, all if there is provision for diaspora voting, they can all be fully involved And I think we are also putting all that into consideration. We are doing the best we can in reforming the Electoral Act in such a way that we don't have to say it will be 100% perfect for Nigerians, but at least a very high score mark in the process of giving an Electoral Act that we believe it carries a lot of solves a lot of problems that exist as of now. Like the issue, we also need support of the judiciary. Unfortunately, we find that some judges who are not aware of the process of even the card reader system and the rest, and now we introduce electronic voting. It's also another thing that I appeal to the judges or the judiciary to be able to assist us in maintaining a free, fair, and credible election. Because when judgments are done in a better process, people are comfortable. It means that definitely will have confidence in the electoral system. And we are working in that direction. And we hope by as soon as possible we get the act ready. We'll still have time to come and explain to Nigerians.
All right. Senator Gaya, thank you very much for your explanation. I just wondering, Festus Okoye, you've frequently drawn attention to this, and I hope that the distinguished senator and his colleagues in the National Assembly are fully minded of this, that the provision that INEC is requesting in the Electoral Act will be one that relates to the use of technology, so that whatever technology is adaptable to the conduct of election is deployed by INEC without having to return to the legislature to seek approval. It is not electronic voting per se. It has to do with all the gadgets, including your card reader, whatever it is. Not just because electronic voting is specific.
Anything electronic.
That's anything that technology, not e-voting per se. Yes. Okay, I'm quoting you right, I believe.
Right. Yes.
All right, that's one. But the other one you left hanging has to do with the powers of review over the conduct or outcome of an election as declared and returned by a returning officer. A returning officer who has acted under duress, as we saw in recent elections. So, Sam Itodo is saying, look, it shouldn't be the courts, but that INEC, of course, who is the appointer of a returning officer. What are the likely complications arising from this?
Our proposal is based on our experience and our review of the performance of our returning officers. Some of them perform very, very well, and we are proud of the work they have done. But there are also some who deviated from our processes and procedures, and some of these deviations were deliberate. And I'll give you an example. In one of the senatorial districts during the 2019 elections, a returning officer who is a professor wrote that, look, the result I declared, I didn't know how it came about because there were disruptions at the the collation center, and I ran away. And when I came back, the electoral officer just gave me a result to declare. But because of the tension, I had to declare the result, which I didn't know where it came from. And he said this in writing to us, in his handwriting. The same professor now went to court, having been procured, to go and say that the result he declared at the collation center was free, fair, and transparent.
Genuine.
And genuine. You know, so for us, and then you also know that in some of our, some of the elections and in some of the collation centers, some of the returning officers were forced at gunpoint to declare election results and so on. So what we are saying is that we appoint these people, and they are answerable to the commission.
Your agent, yes.
It is unacceptable for our agent, who is answerable to us, to make a declaration and a return, and we see that the return was not made in accordance with the law, was not made was not made voluntarily. For us not to say, oh, you know, let us look at this result and see whether it was made prepared voluntarily and so on. So the National Assembly has given us, if the bill is passed, the leeway to take a second look at some of those results and review them within a reasonable time. And if there is cogent and verifiable evidence that it was not made in accordance with the law and in accordance with if it was not made voluntarily, that we could review it and then take a different decision relating to it. So I think that it is progressive and it's dynamic.
When you say, Nadabo, see some issue here. When you say that you could then review,
yes,
you cannot have all the details spelled out in the law.
Yes.
Would it require INEC to walk back from the collation to the polling units? Because collation is the results you get from the polling units. So in the event of the example you cited a while ago, that the returning officer said there was commotion, so he fled. When he returned, he now saw a result handed to him, and he now made a declaration, but indicated that to you, the report that, look, there was a challenge. But what will be the nature of the review? Will it be to say you walk back and then you now get another returning officer to announce, or you now become the returning officer as INEC? There could be some legalities around this area. Do you understand my question?
And even more so, reviewing meaning recollecting or going back thereon, starting the process all over. How do we get across to the facts that are being rejected by the initial person? Briefly, because we're running short of time.
Yes, you see, our electoral process starts from the polling unit. At the polling unit, you enter the results in Form EC8A. Then it goes to the registration area collation centers. He enters from EC8B, and then he walks to the last portion. The point is, in one of the collations, a returning officer decrease the votes of a candidate by 5,000 and increase the votes of another candidate by 5,000. And then we got the collation officers at the local government level who came and said, look, this was the result we presented, and this was what the returning officer did. So we can walk back, but the process will be transparent and it will be fair to all and sundry. Yes.
That's great. Really.
Nadabo,
yeah.
You know, one other point, we'll let the distinguished senator take this away, and Festus Okoye also pursue this. We're talking about real financial independence of INEC, that it will be a provision, let them receive their funding 6 months before the election or 1 year before the election. I'm not being cynical, but the Appropriation Act, which you pass, is a law.
Yes.
All right, but as we have in the States, there's no total compliance. So suppose it then arises that, oh, yes, we know that we're supposed to do it, but we don't have funds. So would you make it a first-line charge?
Well, INEC is on first-line charge, clearly. So there is nothing like saying they are being given quota by quota based on that. It's a first-line charge, and that's why one of the principles of them being independent. So that fund will be directly given to them as stated in the budget, and so that problem might not be there.
Okay.
Whatever sources, even that's why I found that when the INEC gives contract, the contracts are sure that they will be paid, and they perform even when the funds are not there at the initial stage. So we are insisting that this funding should be given earlier, because what they are procuring, the computers and all the things to do with electronic voting, how to start earlier. And then there must be designs on the system. The design will be in such a way that it's going to fit Nigerian standard. You just go on the shelf and pick a computer and say, this is the computer we use for voting. No, it must be designed by the staffs of INEC and then implemented by the vendors who are going to produce those things. So therefore, funding is very essential, and we're making this important that the government must be able to provide this funding. And the INEC should even start applying for part of the funding for 23 elections by 2021.
Oh, well, many thanks to the Senator Kabiruga, Chair Senate Committee on Electoral Matters. We thank you for being on this program this morning.
Thank you very much for being here.
Festus Okoye, you've been with us all the while. We hope you are going to keep being with us whenever issues raised like that. We thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Sami Todo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa. It's our pleasure you've been with us, and we thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you. Always a delight.
Many thanks. Also, very big thank you out there to especially our tweets. They came from Dele Jackson, Badamasi Haruna, Suleiman Babagana, and a host of others. These are great concerns to this topic and to this station, of course, to the country as a whole. We thank you so much for being part of this program. That was Good Morning Nigeria, that is. We thank you so much for being part of this. I am Yusuf Nadabo Usman. We'll see you tomorrow with another package.
Yeah, we also would like to appreciate Nadabo Olushola Babalola of the Transition Monitoring Group, who was with us via Zoom before his connection failed. I'm Kingsley Osadola. Do take care of yourself and stay safe and be well.